people like me. You need people like me so you can point your f***ing fingers and say, that's the bad guy. That's the bad guy. That's the bad guy. That's the bad guy. That's the bad guy.
To the mother relay, we're covering today's top boxing news.
Okay, we'll start with this. In my previous video, we talked about how light heavyweight and heavyweight champion of Costa Rica, Hannah Gabriels, she called out Franchon Crews this past weekend. Franchon herself, she did some calling out of her own. She called Savannah Marshall out for a potential fight down the line at super middleweight for all of her alphabet titles, and she bumped into former unified middleweight champion of Germany, Christina Hammer.
The Savannah Marshall fight is definitely a possibility in the future, but not the immediate future.
Not straight away. Christina Hammer, on the other hand, there's no excuse that can't happen next.
No reason that it shouldn't. Christina's been busy. She's been fighting.
She fought 2 times the year the pandemic hit. She fought 2 times in 2020, fought once last year, late last year, and she saw action earlier this year in May. No idea if she has any plans of fighting, at least once again, before this year is out. But ideally, now that Christina is no longer campaigning as a middleweight, she's campaigning as a super middleweight. And the fact that she doesn't have any ring rust or cobwebs that she needs to shake off. The ideal fight for Christina is a Franchon Crews fight. Christina Hammer, she's been out of the world title picture for at least 2 going on 3 years now, since 2019 when she dropped that decision, that lopsided decision, to Clarissa Shields.
She lost that fight in one-sided fashion.
There's really no shame in that. Clarissa Shields is one of the top 2 pound-for-pound fighters in the sport, but it's about time things get serious for Christina Hammer.
Sporting a professional record of 28 wins, 1 loss, just 1 loss, no draws, 13 knockouts, having never been stopped.
When last I checked, Christina Hammer was supposed to have partnered up with Wazerman Boxing. That's Kale Sorland, Nisei Sorland.
They promote a lot of fighters, Chris Eubank Jr. among them. Chris Eubank Jr., who was all tangled up in Conor Benn's ped fiasco.
In other words, they're a well-to-do promotional outfit that are fully capable of orchestrating a fight between Christina Hammer and Franchon Crews amongst themselves with no outside involvement. I don't know. I don't quite know what Franchon's promotional situation is. The last I heard, she inked some kind of deal with Matchroom, but I'm not sure if that's a multi-fight deal. She did fight under the banner on the undercard of Taylor versus Serrano, but will she continue to fight under the banner moving forward? That's the question.
She's not going to fight under the banner moving forward. There's no reason that Kale and Nisei Sorland can't get her in the ring with their fighter, Christina Hammer.
There's no reason they shouldn't be able to. They've long had their hands on the pulse of the German boxing scene, and they do know a thing or two about the UK boxing scene as well. They are a well-to-do, experienced promotional outfit. Lest we forget, the World Boxing Super Series was their baby, after all.
They were the ones behind that.
So they should be able to, at least in theory, get this fight over the line. It's not exactly a fight where you have to break the bank in order to do it. You do have to pay Franchon a respectable amount of money, something respectable, because she's not just a champion, she's literally the champion, the only champion at super middleweight. So you have to pay her something respectful.
Yeah, definitely. But it ain't a fight where you gotta break the bank in order to do it.
Kale and Nisei Sorland should be able to, in theory at least, be able to make this fight happen for their fighter, because if she's campaigning at super middleweight,
she's there. It's Franchon she should be trying to get in the ring with. There's nobody else at super middleweight worth fighting.
When it comes to Savannah Marshall, the former middleweight champion, she posted this after the fight saying, "I want to say a massive thank you to everyone who came out to show support last night, everyone who bought a ticket, and everyone who tuned in to watch. I am eternally grateful. I am absolutely gutted. I came up short last night against what was the better fighter." Savannah was gracious in defeat. She agreed that Clarissa Shields won the fight. The right woman got the decision.
But here's what you got to pay attention to. The fight drummed up 2 million views for Sky Sports as a platform. 2 million.
That's not even counting however many people here in the United States watched the fight on ESPN+. Those are just the UK numbers. 2 million viewers. That's more than Katie Taylor versus Amanda Serrano.
There was a question leading up to this fight as to whether or not it would be as big a fight as Katie Taylor versus Amanda Serrano, and I have to say I've been quite pleasantly, proven wrong. I didn't think this would be quite as big as that fight, get the same attention. I really didn't think it would end up getting more views than Taylor versus Serrano did, but it did. Once again proving that you can put two girls in the ring as a main event and people are going to want to tune in. They're going to want to watch. So long as the fighters are up to scratch and on the level, they can put on a show. This main event and the co-main event before it, they delivered, and that's what you want. It ended up being the most watched women's sporting event ever on Sky Sports, and it sold out the O2 Arena. Over 18,000 plus tickets sold for this thing. Savannah Marshall, even though she lost, it wasn't a demoralizing loss. It was a thoroughly entertaining fight. Even if Savannah Marshall wasn't able to knock out Clarissa Shields, the fight fans in the UK aren't going to hold that against her because Clarissa Shields is no ordinary fighter. She's one of the pound-for-pound best fighters in the world. Savannah Marshall's still good for a knockout. Unless you're Clarissa Shields, there's a good chance you're going to get stopped. And if Savannah's fighting, there's a good chance people are going to show up and they're going to want to tune in. The UK fight fans are not stuck on unbeaten records. That's not a hang-up to them the way it is with American fight fans. Savannah can still drum up views, still drum up business for the Sky Sports platform and the Boxer promotional banner. The Bucks shouldn't stop here, and I hope that it doesn't. I want to see Savannah Marshall back in the ring, on the bounce, on the rebound at some point next year. The sooner the better. You can build her back up and build a Franchon Crews undisputed showdown. You can get her in there with Christina Hammer, who I just talked about. You can get her in there with Aline Cedar-Ruz or Hannah Gabriels, who I mentioned in my previous video. There are still fights out there for Savannah, irrespective of a Shields fight or a Shields rematch. There's more work needs doing, and these divisions need the work that started on Sky Sports. Ben Shalom and Adam Smith picking up where Eddie Hearn left off. His commitment to women's boxing, what they're doing with their own shows. And what Eddie Hearn is still doing with his. It's not like he stopped. They have to build on what they've already done. This has been the biggest year in the sport of women's boxing. Taylor versus Serrano, Mayer versus Baumgartner, Shields versus Marshall. They've got to build on that. They can't stop now. Savannah ain't got nothing to be ashamed of. She lost a fight to one of the best pound-for-pound fighters in the sport. Not everybody's going to be able to go the distance with Savannah Marshall, not unless you're named Clarissa Shields, and there's only one Clarissa Shields. The metrics for this fight far exceeded my expectations, and that's good news. They've got to keep the ball rolling. There are more fights to make, and there still is more ground to cover. They have to build on this success. It is pivotal. It's critical, not just to the fighters that participated on this card, not just to the ones that fought, but the other girls that want to. In men's middleweight news, the story seems to be per Wilson Baldini Jr., boxing scribe Wilson Baldini Jr. The WBA accepted Triple G fight with Esquiva Falcao first, and then the winner must face Erislandi Lara. Now what this indicates is that Gennady does mean business. He's not retiring, and behind the scenes, the wheels are in motion for his eventual ring return. His ring return as a unified reigning middleweight champion. But because he's a network and promotional free agent, as far as we know, that's the last that we heard, there is a question as to where he will be fighting moving forward. Will he continue to box under the Matchroom banner on the DAZN platform, or will he pop up somewhere else? ESPN, Top Rank, perhaps. Maybe the PBC? Maybe, but not just yet, because he's fighting Esquiva Falcao. To my knowledge, Esquiva Falcao has no associations, no affiliation with the PBC, even though Erislandi Lara does. I wanted the Lara fight more than I want this fight, because the Lara fight has backstory. This doesn't. Been waiting for Triple G and Lara to settle up with each other for a long time. And I would have preferred that fight for Gennady than this fight, but I have to tell you, that's not because this fight isn't a good fight. This actually is a good fight, and Esquiva Falcao, in spite of flying below the radar for a long time, this is a very formidable fighter, an unbeaten fighter who sports a professional record of 30 wins, no losses, no draws, 20 knockouts. 32 years old, still in his physical prime, an amateur standout, an Olympian, a silver medalist. A southpaw who's been chomping at the bit to get a big fight. He's wanted to get back in the ring with his old nemesis in the amateurs, from the amateurs, Ryota Murata. He hasn't had any luck there, but if this story checks out, and Gennady fights him next. No, I don't get the sense this is going to be a walk in the park. Far from it. Like I said, this guy's 32 years old, a former Olympian, a silver medalist,
a southpaw who's in his prime, unlike Erislandy Lara, who's an aging fighter, the same way that Gennady's an aging fighter. I would have preferred that fight more than this one, though I'd be lying to you if I told you that I didn't think this fight was more dangerous than that fight. I actually think this is a more dangerous fight.
Yeah, Erislandy Lara is a southpaw, so's Esquiva Falcao. The difference is Esquiva's in his prime. Lara isn't.
The difference is Esquiva is an unbeaten fighter with an unbeaten record. Lara's been beat before. Lara got beat by Jarrett Hurd years ago for...
Got beat years ago, for God's sake. If Jarrett Hurd can beat Lara, you think Gennady can't?
Esquiva Falcao, comparatively, he's been busier than Erislandy Lara. He fought 2 times in 2020, 2 times in 2021. He's already seen action at least once this year, back in May.
Lara hasn't been as active as Esquiva Falcao.
Lara only fought once in 2020, only once in 2021, and only once this year.
He's older, he's past his prime, not as active.
Likely, not as sharp as Esquiva Falcao.
So even though Esquiva Falcao isn't necessarily as well known as Lara, that doesn't mean that he doesn't pose some challenges or can't pose some challenges to Gennady.
He can. Now, why Gennady is choosing to fight Esquiva Falcao as opposed to Erislandy Lara in a fight that I think is a safer fight and a more winnable fight?
It's likely because Esquiva Falcao is ranked number 1 by way of the IBF, and Gennady
hasn't satisfied a mandatory for them since Camille Zeremata, well over a year ago.
That's got to be it. He's trying to hang on to the red belt. He's trying to hang on to the IBF title.
And he may be under orders to fight Esquiva Falcao, at which point he asks the WBA for some amnesty, a bit more time, so that he can take care of this guy en route to their guy, their mandatory challenger, Erislandy Lara. That's got to be it.
Because fighting Esquiva Falcao instead of Erislandy Lara,
that's not exactly the easier fight. You're facing a younger, unbeaten fighter with a great amateur background that's got a hankering for a big fight, that's been looking for a big fight.
He was last in action in his native Brazil in May of this year against Christian Fabian Rios. He decisioned that guy.
I'm not sure what Esquiva Falcao's promotional situation is. I think there at least was a tenuous association with Top Rank, though given that his last fight was in Brazil, wasn't shown here in America, I don't think he's with them anymore. I'm not sure.
Does fighting Esquiva Falcao herald a partnership between Gennady Golovkin and the people at Top Rank and ESPN?
Or will Esquiva simply come over to the DAZN and Matchroom side of things? There's a genuine question there.
There is, because if Gennady jumps into bed with Top Rank, that could create issues moving forward for the Lara fight.
At that point, Erislandy Lara would have to leave the shores of PBC Island, cross over to Top Rank and ESPN if he wants that Golovkin fight.
Just something to consider. If Gennady Golovkin goes in there and splatters an unbeaten fighter in his prime, a former Olympian, a silver medalist,
the true value of the Canelo Alvarez victory over him will be revealed. Then it will be a victory that ages well, because a lot of people were expecting Canelo to stop him. I was expecting Canelo to stop him, and he didn't. There's people out there, they don't know how to feel about that. But if that same Gennady Golovkin goes in there with a young, unbeaten guy in his prime, a southpaw from a great amateur background, if he goes in there and splatters that guy, we'll know.
We'll know that Gennady's still got it, but moreover, we'll know that Canelo's victory over Gennady Golovkin, it still counts.
Canelo beat him decisively. He beat him in one-sided fashion. It's almost like Gennady made a decision
in his own mind that he wasn't going to get overly ambitious with Canelo Alvarez, that he knew he couldn't match his speed, knew he couldn't match his power, and he would just try to survive because of the monetary value of the fight. There was just simply too much money on the table to not do it. So he did it.
But he didn't go for it. He just survived. Just did enough that there would be enough left of him after the fight to move on and move back down and continue to reign as a middleweight champion. The true value of Canelo Alvarez's recent victory over Gennady in their trilogy, the true value of that is set to be revealed.
Yeah, if he does end up fighting Esquiva Falcao.
Presumably sometime next year.
Because I don't think there's enough time in there for Gennady to return this year.
Finally, we now know who it is David Benavidez is going to be fighting early next year. Per a tweet from Mike Coppinger via his sources, David Benavidez and Uzcategui, former champion Uzcategui, are finalizing a deal for a bout in January. Sources told ESPN the fight was set for November 2021 before Uzcategui tested positive for a Reped, R-E-P-O. Now PBC running...
They're running it back.
So in other words, they're just rescheduling it. They're deciding to revisit this fight between David Benavidez and Jose Uzcategui. And this is what I was telling you guys before. To some degree, all the powers that be in the sport are complicit.
To some degree, they're complicit with doping in the sport because Jose Uzcategui missed this opportunity to fight David Benavidez.
He missed this opportunity in November of last year due to testing positive for performance-enhancing drugs. And here you guys are revisiting that fight.
It's like nothing ever happened. The show goes on.
Jose Uzcategui, former IBF champion Jose Uzcategui, sports a professional record of 32 wins, 4 losses, no draws.
27 knockouts.
He lost the IBF title to Caleb Plant back in 2019, January of 2019. He also dropped a decision to Lionel Thompson that same year. Since then, he has seen action 3 times.
He sat out all of 2020, fought 3 times last year. All 3 of those fights were south of the border in Mexico.
This fight with David, you know, it wouldn't be so bad if they were able to do it in a timely fashion, but for David Benavidez, a 2-time WBC super middleweight champion, for him to have only seen action once, just once, this entire calendar year, against David Lemieux of all people.
You've got to do better than that.
You're scheduling this thing for January? Why don't you schedule a Caleb Plant fight for January? Caleb Plant, who was just in action against Anthony Durrell. He stopped that guy. Anthony Durrell is a common opponent between Caleb and David, and what you're doing is booking David.
You're doing a wife swap.
Caleb fought a guy that David beat already. Now you want David to fight a guy that Caleb beat already. Why don't they just fucking fight each other? They're on the same side of the street.
Doesn't make any goddamn sense.
The issue here is that they should have been able to get David back out there at least one more time this year to set up something bigger for next year so you could move straight into a Caleb Plant showdown.
The issue here is that they're mismanaging this kid's career and wasting a lot of his time. Wasting his best years.
Does it make sense for a guy like David to have only fought once, just once, against David Lemieux, of all people, this entire calendar year? Does that make sense? Is that a productive schedule? Is that conducive towards building his brand and building his buzz as a fighter? Are they building on the momentum of the David Lemieux knockout?
You don't think that's a massive waste of time? Young guy like David, all he did this year was fight David Lemieux.
The ideal fight to make for early next year would have been the Caleb Plant fight, especially now that Caleb's back in the winner's bracket, racking up a highlight reel knockout over Anthony Durrell. That would have been ideal. This formality fight just seems like a waste of time, even if it is a decent fight on paper. He's had enough of those kinds of fights.
I don't know. The most he stands to benefit from this is if he turns out to be the first guy to stop Jose, since Jose's never been stopped.
There might be some value in that, but isn't the Caleb Plant fight long overdue? How long are you going to put distance between David and that guy? David and that fight. Just get it over with already.
You failed to do it when they were both unbeaten champions, and here you are.
David's going to be busy with Jose early next year. I guess we won't be seeing Caleb Plant anytime soon.